I'm Kailer Yaremchuk. Welcome into my new series here at Oilers Nation called Giant Offseason Questions, and it is all brought to you by our friends at Sherwood Ford, the Giant. Today, we're looking at something that's really gained a lot of steam over the last couple of days, and it's debating whether or not it's a good idea for the Edmonton Oilers to buy out the contract of Zack Kassian. Now, Kassian has 2 more years left on a deal, and he carries a cap hit of $3.2 million. But what would happen if they bought him out? Well, the first part is instant savings. The Oilers would save around $2.5 million in cap space for the next season, which would give them the wiggle room to potentially sign all 3 of their forward RFAs and even bring back a defenseman like Brett Kulak. It might not give them enough space to go replace the production from Evander Kane, but it would get them closer to meeting that goal. The savings for next year would be great. There are still savings in year 2 of the contract, but they're not as good as in year 1. The Oilers would only save around $1.8 million in year 2 of that deal, but in the final 2 years, or the 2 extra years when Kassian's contract would have already expired if they didn't buy him out, there's a $960K cap penalty for those 2 seasons. So just under $1 million in a cap penalty for the final 2 years. So while the Oilers would get savings for 2 years, Kassian would be off the team, and his contract would stay on the books for another 4 seasons. So there are certainly pros and cons to doing this. I kind of compared it to going out drinking with your friends. You have a few beers. In the moment, it's a great time to have an extra drink or 2. But in the morning, the hangover comes, and that's often where the regret sets in. For the Oilers, they're still paying a guy like Andre Sekera $1.5 million. They still have 4 more years of James Neal on the books at $1.9 million. It can really sting to have that extra money on your books. But when you look at the situation GM Ken Holland is in, I'm not sure if he has much of a choice. Now, obviously, if you can get a team to trade for Zack Kassian, you do it. And it's not unrealistic to think it could happen. You look at last summer, Ryan Reeves, who had a $2.3 million cap hit, he was traded to the New York Rangers, and the Vegas Golden Knights actually got a 3rd-round pick back in that deal. I do think it's unlikely, though, that a team takes Zack Kassian at his full $3.2 million. So either the Oilers need to throw in an asset to make that happen, and I think that's unlikely because they don't have a 2nd, a 3rd, or a 4th-round pick in the 2022 NHL draft. They could attach a prospect to the contract, and maybe a team would be enticed to take it at that point, but I'm not sure if it's a great idea for the Oilers to dip into their prospect pool when the option for a buyout certainly does exist. If you attach a prospect and that prospect ends up becoming an NHLer, well, you're better off just having them on your NHL roster and sort of making up for the extra cap hit from buying out Kassian by having a good young player on their ELC on your active roster. The other option is to retain a little bit of money, and this would be the dream scenario. If someone out there was willing to give you a 4th or a 5th round pick for Zack Kassian, and all you had to do was retain $1.2 million, that gives you cap savings for the next 2 seasons, and there's no dead money for a 3rd and 4th year like there would be with a buyout. But even then, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect that Zack Kassian will be able to be traded even at a $2 million cap hit. You might have a tough time doing that. It would be the best scenario for Ken Holland, but I still think the most realistic scenario is a buyout for Kassian. And this isn't me saying he's a bad player. If you look at the projected Oilers roster for next season, though, you can see that he's likely going to be pretty far down the depth chart. He's a guy who produces very inconsistently in the bottom 6. He doesn't always bring that fiery playoff-like Kassian that we like to see. Heck, he didn't bring that consistently in the playoffs this last season. But I do think he'll get another NHL contract somewhere. He's not a totally useless player. There are GMs who will value the intangibles he brings. I think the Oilers value the intangibles he brings. But down on the 4th line, you just can't justify paying $3.2 million to a winger when there are other spots throughout this lineup where you need to spend some money. You can't let Brett Kulak go. He was your best defenseman in the playoffs. You need to make sure that your 3 young RFAs, guys who are, kind of the future of the 2nd and 3rd line for the Oilers, you need to make sure Yamamoto, McLeod, and Puljujarvi are taken care of, and you need to replace the production from Evander Kane. And if Mike Smith retires, you might need to go find a new starting goalie. The point is, there are a lot of items that Ken Holland's going to have to check off the list this summer, and he needs cap space to do it. An easy way to do that, even though it might be painful in years 3 and 4, is to buy out Zack Kassian and get 2 years of savings. It'll be an interesting offseason around Edmonton, and there is a lot more for me to get to every week in Giant Offseason Questions brought to you by Sherwood Ford the Giant. Got a question you want me to answer? Drop it below in the comments, and don't forget, hit the subscribe button as well.